Hi, you guys. How are you doing? I hope you're holding up okay under all of the excitement with the pandemic situation. There's a lot going on, to say the least, and we're not going to be able to cover even a fraction of it today. But we're still gonna talk about it because seems to be the top subject on most people's minds who have an idea what's happening. And I thought it would be nice to bring one of our doctor friends in, Dr. Rima Laibow, who's been on the show many times before and is always a great guest, very much willing to say exactly what she thinks, which is kind of refreshing. They're getting treatments ready, they're getting quarantines ready, they're getting medical martial law ready to implement. It's going to be very important not give in to fear and panic and all that stuff, no matter what happens. This is our friend, Dr. Rima Laibow, and she's been on the show many times, and it's always refreshing and inspiring and educational. And we have a brief time here, but there's some important stuff going on, as you may have noticed if you open your eyes in the last few weeks. Part of what's important going on is that while this crisis unfolds, and this one is not like the Zika one or some of the others that we'll mention, there are treatments coming before vaccines are antivirals that are, of course, ready to go right now. And we want to talk about a lot of things. So whatever background you'd like to give, Dr. Rima, and then we'll get into, if we have time, some of the antivirals that are going to be really heavily promoted, maybe even mandated if they can manage that, depends on the supply, and any other things we have time to get into that you want to share.
I'd be delighted. Let me tell you, I just came racing home from an afternoon of dancing, and finishing, I'll be going to an evening of dancing. It's contra dancing. It's a social dance. And as I was dancing to live music, wonderful music, I was thinking, I wonder if the next contra dance, which is in 1 week from today, will be canceled. And I thought, no, probably it'll take another week before the lockdowns start coming in. Now, there's a break halfway through a contra dance, and we have some snacks and chat and so on. And everybody was slathering their hands with wildly toxic hand sanitizer. Not a good idea, damaging to your immune system. And I was saying, I'm very concerned about this socially engineered and genetically engineered pandemic and panic that is being arranged for us. And I think there are important precautions to be taken. Each of the people that I talked to, and these are people that I've known for 3 years or 2.5 years since I moved here, each of them looked at me as if I had suddenly sprouted not only one head, but two, and I were talking Latvian to people who don't understand Latvian, a language I don't speak. It was a universal response on the part of about 50 people.
Wow.
And I thought, well, this is a very interesting piece of quick impromptu research. No IRB needed. Most people are swayed by the presumption of normalcy, that everything has been fine, so it will be fine. And they are therefore sheep to the slaughter should someone in charge wish to slaughter.
And that's 50 out of 50. That's pretty high percentage.
There were little clots of people. People tend to coagulate or agglomerate in those situations. And so I had the chance to speak to a number of clots of people. And it was, to me, horrifying, and further cemented my position in their minds as a lunatic who happens to dance well and be pleasant. So this is what you will encounter, folks, when you speak to people. It doesn't mean they're right. It means they're deluded. And that's very important to keep in mind. Now, you mentioned antivirals. Ganciclovir, Tamiflu. There are a whole bunch of things that are supposedly antiviral. The problem is that while this coronavirus has been carefully and elaborately and lengthily genetically engineered to have 4 strands of the HIV-1 organism. Whether it causes HIV or not is not the point. The point is it's the organism from which it was taken, and 1 strand of SARS DNA. And coronaviruses do not assort themselves with the type of virus that the HIV virus is. whether you believe that it's been genetically engineered to kill you or not, which I happen to believe it has been, its susceptibility to control mechanisms has not been, in my understanding, altered, which means that nano silver, 10 parts per million, I'm not talking about colloidal silver, I'm not talking about nano silver 9 billion parts per million, because it's not a situation where more is better. 10 parts per million controls the virus. Now, because of the Fraud and Death Administration, we are not permitted to say it kills the virus. Viruses are not alive, so that doesn't make sense. But it stops the virus. It's an antibiotic. It's an antiviral. We're not allowed to say those things because we sort of lost the First Amendment, but that's another discussion. So I'm saying it controls the virus, and the way it does that is two ways. One, it makes it, your immune system is supported to the point where you don't get the disease, or if you do, it's a minor event. But the second thing it does, and we know this from research on Ebola virus conducted by the Department of Threat Reduction of the United States Department of Defense, with nano silver, 10 parts per million, 25 and 50 parts per million, what it does is prevent the virus from attaching to the cell, step number one in viral pathology, pathogenesis, the creation of disease. It stops it from penetrating the cell, step number two in viral pathogenesis, and it stops it from replicating, capturing the DNA of your own cell, replicating, bursting the cell, and creating the symptoms. Now, the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that are brought out are, to my knowledge, not effective against coronaviruses. And in terms of its susceptibility to being controlled, it's still a coronavirus. Yes, it's an engineered coronavirus, but it is a coronavirus that responds the way other coronaviruses will. And Tamiflu and the other antivirals are not particularly effective. Now, that might not be a problem if this were not a serious and potentially lethal infection, which it is, but they're also very toxic.
Can I ask you one thing before you go further? It might be good to remind people that the coronavirus group is big. There's a lot of coronaviruses.
There's a lot of coronaviruses.
Right. And some of them are not too big of a deal. You know, they find coronaviruses in cases of flu and colds and more ordinary things like that. And some of the people saying it's no big deal are saying, you know, it's like getting a cold or the flu.
Our president said it's just like a flu. And unfortunately, he's dreadfully wrong about that. It is not just like a flu. And coronavirus, look, we live in happy harmony with a gajillion different types of bacteria. And we've only recently, in the last few years, come to a generally widespread awareness that we need the bacteria in our body, that there are more bacteria in us than there are mammalian cells, that without the bacteria in our gut, on our skin, in our mouths, in our orifices and eyes and so on, without those bacteria, we're not going to survive. Well, it turns out that there are viruses in that same class. There are a gajillion viruses that we live with perfectly happily, and they tune our immune system up and they get it humming so that if they meet another virus that is not such a good friend, they can whack it. Now, the fact is, among that group of happy viral passengers in our bodies and on our bodies are a bunch of coronaviruses. There's nothing deadly about a coronavirus. There are lots of them. It's like saying, oh, shoes, that shoe could kill me. Well, yeah, I suppose if you ate it, but the shoe by itself won't kill you. Now, this particular coronavirus has been engineered to create vast disease potential, as was SARS, as was MERS, as was the avian flu virus, as was the swine flu virus. And eventually, I have been saying for years, eventually they'll get it right. Eventually they'll make a depopulation virus that does what they want it to do. The ones that I just mentioned didn't. But there's nothing inherently deadly about a coronavirus. But a coronavirus still responds like a coronavirus, even if it's had 4 strands of the HIV-1 and 1 strand of the SARS vaccine inserted into it. The HIV-1 strands are holdfasts. They help the virus grab onto the cell wall. And then the SARS strand, as I understand it, and I'm still getting up-to-date information on this, so this may not be completely accurate, my understanding is it helps it penetrate the cell. But the issue is, okay, it's a genetically engineered weaponized virus. United States participated in this, Canada participated in this, China's been working on it for about 5 years once they got it from, as I understand, Duke University with NIH funding. Okay, now what? Well, they passed it through bats, the intermediate horseshoe bat, 605 of them in the Wuhan CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control, allegedly. I think it's the Center for Disease Creation, like our own CDC. And from there, we got the bat story and the wet market nonsense. Now, whether this is designed to kill more of them or more of us is a matter of speculation, and you can see it both ways. But the fact is, it's designed to do damage. And the thing that will kill most people is not the virus, especially if they use the Nano Silver. And Richard, I don't know your protocol, whether I can tell people where they can get it or whether you tell people where they can get it, but it's vitally important to get it.
Yeah, you're welcome to tell people, sure.
Okay. Go to www.NSF, that stands for Natural Solutions Foundation, NSF Marketplace, and there it is. And it is vitally important. I personally am betting my life on the efficacy of the immune support of this Nano Silver. I know I'm not going to get the coronavirus.
I want to interject a question before you get farther.
Yes.
You mentioned in that little paper that you happened to find from the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which was very educational, that you said something I didn't know, which was that they not only tested 10 parts per million, but 25 and 50 as well.
Yes.
Now, did those not work?
They did not work as well.
Okay.
The higher you get in the parts per million, the lower the efficacy. Now,
that's really
interesting.
And that's not necessarily true on external application, right?
Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, it depends how the silver is formulated. We had this discussion privately, and maybe you think it's interesting for your audience. I'll be happy to.
Maximum education, whatever we can cram into the time we've got.
You can make colloidal silver on your kitchen table. You cannot make this nano silver on your kitchen table unless you live in a metallurgical lab and you've set up a kitchen table, because the nano silver is manufactured at high pressure, that's 10,000 pounds per square inch, and high voltage, that's 10,000 volts, over a period extending over several days. And what that does is form a number of different things. First of all, a sphere of 4 molecules of silver and 4 molecules of oxygen, Ag4O4. And that sphere has a static charge. The static charge disrupts the virus and the bacteria and the parasite, but leaves the healthy cells in your gut and the healthy cells of your body untouched. That's mechanism number 1. Most nano silver does not have that Ag4O4 sphere. That sphere is opened by an enzyme that's present in every body fluid called catalase. Once it opens up, then the 4 molecules of silver and the 4 molecules of oxygen float free. The molecules of oxygen get in the way of the replication and function of disease-causing things because they are oxygen haters. Healthy bacteria and healthy cells are oxygen lovers. So that's mechanism number 2. Mechanism number 3 is that inside the sphere is the secret sauce, the 10 micron nano silver particles. Then they float out and they do their disruptive magic, supporting your immune system and getting in the way of all these other functions. And then there's something else. Perhaps the dean of material science, who is now unfortunately deceased, Rustum Roy, spent 3 years figuring out how to get the molecules in the solution and the atoms in the solution to hold a frequency, and it's 910 terahertz, which is the same frequency that blue lamps in hospitals and food service areas emit to kill organisms that cause disease. It doesn't kill organisms that don't cause disease. So there are 4 mechanisms of action.
Terahertz is a really fast frequency, right? I mean, that sounds like it's above gigahertz. Is that right?
Yes, terahertz is very, 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 very fast.
Yeah.
Very fast. And so what we have is a 4-fold mechanism of, and here I must defer to the illegal restrictions of the Fraud and Death Administration, a 4-fold impact to create immune support. And it does, in fact, support your immune system. Normal function of your immune system is to keep you from getting a disease, and this helps very well. So the pharmaceutical drugs are toxic. For instance, Tamiflu, which was used widely in Japan during the swine flu non-pandemic nonsense thing that was created, caused boys specifically under the age of 11 specifically to become suicidal and kill themselves in appalling numbers, jumping off buildings and so on. We don't know why it was gender related and age related, but it certainly is psychiatrically toxic. That's the Donald Rumsfeld Gilead drug. Other antivirals are problematic. If you want an antiviral, do what the Chinese are doing for patients on an experimental basis right now that I've been doing in my practice for virtually 50 years, and that is intravenous vitamin C. That's wonderful, but most people don't have access to that on an immediate basis, whereas they can have access to the Nano Silver, which I'm not allowed to say is an antiviral, so I'm not saying it's an antiviral.
Good. Let's make sure not to say that it is an antiviral.
No, nor an antibacterial, nor an antiparasitic, even though the effect of it in dealing with malaria was presented to Congress, and they said, don't want to know. Oh, the effect of this same Nano Silver, 10 parts per million, mine, was presented also to Congress in official testimony, and they were told that it would control the SARS coronavirus, not because it was SARS, but because it was a coronavirus, and they proceeded to ignore that completely. So they don't want to know, but you do. And this is something that will kill most people, I believe, if they have silver available to them. It will kill most people or disrupt the lives of most people through the engineered social disruption, the disruption of the food chain, the disruption of the services of society, possibly electricity, possibly water. And if you are not making preparations for this intentionally engineered, highly probable, I believe, social disruption, then I think you have your head in the sand, and you probably are having trouble breathing already without the coronavirus because you've got sand in your nostrils and mouth.
I got to ask you a question before you go further, and we'll remember nostrils and mouth, and then you can continue.
Yes, okay.
Right, so that you don't forget. 2 particular antivirals people have been asking me about. I think you're allowed to talk about them.
Of course.
One is disulfiram, and the other is chloroquine phosphate.
Oh, chloroquine, yes. If you'd like to have some serious side effects that can affect any organ in your body and tend to be pretty close to irreversible, chloroquine's your drug of choice, perhaps. Chloroquine is quite toxic. And the first one was disulfiram?
Disulfiram, F-I-R-A-M, yeah.
Well,
And I read about it and it sounded fine except for the liver damage and death that followed that, but otherwise it's.
well, it depends what your agenda is. If your agenda is to get rid of large parts of the population, it's great. You make a profit if you're a pharmaceutical company, and you kill people and you get to treat them making more profit while they die, or you give them a liver transplant, suppress their immune systems, and then they die, but you've been treating them very profitably. So it's really a good drug.
And it is approved, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely approved. Now, let me say something about nutrients, if I may. The FDA has no legal authority to approve or disapprove nutrients. On every bottle of nutrients that you buy, it will say the FDA has not approved this and you cannot diagnose, treat, mitigate, cure, or prevent anything with it. That's true. The FDA has not approved it because the FDA does not have the legal authority to approve it. So it's like my saying, I have not given you a license to practice medicine, Richard. This man does not have a license to practice medicine. Well, that's true, but I don't have the authority to give him a license to practice medicine. So it's a highly deceptive fraud and death administration.
It makes it sound like an outlaw product, actually.
It makes it sound like, ooh, this is very questionable. They haven't approved it. Well, they can't approve it. So every nutrient that you choose to put into your body is unapproved by the FDA because they can't approve it. One of the nutrients that you might want to put into your body is N-acetylcysteine. NAC is widely available. You want a high quality one. Do not buy cheap nutrients. They are made by genetically engineered bacteria. They have all kinds of excipients and fillers and crap in them. And just because it's on somebody's shelf doesn't mean that it's a good product.
Most of those actually come from China, don't they?
Most of them actually come from China, where purity is so carefully monitored, especially for export products. Yay. But the point that I'm making is that the pathogenesis, the disease production process of this particular coronavirus is to attack the NAC receptors of the lungs. It happens that Chinese people genetically have as many as 90% fewer NAC receptors than European people genetically. So they are the first folks who kind of got smashed by this. But viruses have a tendency to reassort and to refine themselves and get either better at what they do, so we have more disease from them, or worse at what they do, so we have less disease and a pandemic will end. Consequently, it seems prudent to me to add NAC, one serving of NAC, let's say, on a prophylactic, preventive, protective basis to your daily regimen. It's not an expensive nutrient. It's a totally non-toxic one, and it'll help every cell in the body anyway.
You said there are receptors in the lungs to NAC.
Yes.
That sounds like it's like kind of like a natural thing that you're supposed to be getting all the time, or there wouldn't be receptors, right?
Precisely. It's something in food, in healthy food. It's not in unhealthy food. It's not in genetically damaged food. It's not in poisoned food. It's not in glyphosate-rich food in nearly the same concentration. But yes, you are supposed to get it.
Okay.
And because of the specific threat, and this organism has been modified to be especially communicable, then I think that it's prudent to take the silver on a prophylactic basis, 1 capful a day for an adult, half a capful for a kid. You want to drink the whole bottle. It's completely non-toxic, but it's a waste of money. I mean, I drink a whole bottle, but I drink it 96 capfuls and then the bottle's gone and I start on another one. And I literally trust my life to this. I travel around the world. I don't get sick. But the point that I was making is that NAC is a good thing to have in this time of trouble, because you don't know who's breathing what. And oh, by the way, I have a web page that we set up. We have a news aggregation site at the Natural Solutions Foundation. It's called Open Source Truth. And Richard, you and Doug post your radio shows there, and that's wonderful. So Open Source Truth has a page called truthaboutcoronavirus.com. You can just go to truthaboutcoronavirus.com if you like, or you can go to Open Source Truth and see Richard's shows and other interesting articles. That's an aggregation site where the news is vetted. It is not a fake news site, it's a real news site. And we carefully make sure that it's the best information that we can find. And I want to bring up something else that's circulating in the information world that may or may not be true, but is certainly important, if I may.
Sure.
There are reports out of China that Wuhan was the test bed, was and is the test bed for 5G.
I heard
now
that
we
too.
know that 5G is terribly damaging to biological systems. We also know that 5G changes the energetic structure of oxygen and makes it harder for you to absorb through your lungs. You don't have any other way of absorbing oxygen. You can't get it through your ears or your eyes or your skin or your armpits. You get it through your lungs. And if you don't get it, guess what? You don't do very well at all. And if you reduce the amount of oxygen available, every organ in your body suffers badly. Well, 5G also impacts negatively the ability of hemoglobin, the oxygen carrying molecule in your blood cells, to pick up oxygen, transport it, and release it. So the entire body's oxygen supply, once the lungs have taken it in, is reduced by 5G. Now, 5G was already beaming everywhere in Wuhan when the virus was released. I believe was intentionally released, and a report from two scientists, two immunologists at the University of South China in Guangzhou makes it very clear how they believe that happened, and it's a very plausible story. But the fact is it was released, and you see people, you see videos of people, assuming that they are true videos and not staged videos, walking along and suddenly just falling over almost at attention and dying.
I was going to ask you about that, and so they don't even have time to break their fall with their arms.
They don't.
I've seen them go right into their face, and it's hard to have actors do that.
It's hard to have actors do that unless you have a gun off screen to their heads.
You have to really pay them a lot to do that.
You have to pay them a lot, or they're very scared.
Yeah.
So, and then after they fall, then the blood flows.
Right.
It's very interesting. That's not how people die. Usually, if somebody's dying, they'll try to crawl toward a building. They'll turn over and try to call for help. They'll struggle. There'll be some distortion of the body posture. These people just go kathup, and that's very unusual. The only thing that makes sense to me is a combination of infection. Yes, I believe that it is an infective virus. Infection plus the damage of the 5G. I think that makes sense. Can I say definitively that I have laboratory testing to confirm that in those people who have gone kathwap and died? No, I do not have that information. But rationally speaking, from what I know about 5G, hemoglobin, oxygen, pathophysiology, and viruses, that makes sense to me, and I consider it a reasonable hypothesis. There are devices that will protect you, at least in your home, against the impact of 5G. We could perhaps do a show specifically on that, or perhaps you have enough knowledge to just share that with your listeners.
Well,
but
if you're
5G,
open to it, you need to come back for a few other continuations.
Possibly, yes.
Yeah.
You have to be very nice to me, Richard, to get me to come back.
Okay.
Richard and I are great friends, and we play with each other. Of course, anytime you want, Richard. So the fact is that those people, that is not how you die from a flu. You die drowning in your own secretions, but you're not walking around in clothing outdoors and then suddenly keeling over. That's not a flu death.
You know, there are some people saying it's only 5G because it's a dry cough that pneumonia is not
Yes,
usually
there are some
connected
people
to.
saying that.
Right.
I don't find that convincing. I don't know that that could be the case because I'm licensed in the state of New York, and unless something happens that I'm not expecting, I'll shortly be licensed in the state of Arizona as a physician. And I get what are, to my mind, largely utterly absurd alerts from the New York State Department of Health. I got one this morning that told me who in New York State would be eligible for COVID-19 testing, what patient would be eligible. And in every category, it's something that I'll mention, and exposure to somebody who came back from China, and exposure in a healthcare situation of this and that sort, or this or that. But there are these ands. But the one thing that everyone who is to be tested or who is eligible to be tested for COVID-19 presence, and I'll talk about that in a moment, has, according to the New York State Department of Health, is fever, fever, and fever, and fever, and. So you're not eligible to be tested for COVID virus, according to the New York State Department of Health, unless you have a fever. I don't know how 5G creates a fever. I don't know that it doesn't, but of all the literature that I have read about what 5G does, and it's very scary literature, none of it suggests a fever. And there are a lot of ways to have a dry cough.
Also, you could have the virus and not be symptomatic, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, and then shooting these thermometers at people who could be asymptomatic is missing the whole point.
And you can, as we published in on Open Source Truth yesterday, you can have the virus, have a disease, get well, and then get it again, because you can continue to cycle through the disease process.
And the second time is worse.
I don't know that yet. I haven't.
That's just what we've been hearing.
That.
Okay.
Well, yeah, but and maybe it is, and maybe the third time it's not a charm. I don't know. I don't have the data on that, but I do know that auto-infection is very much a process.
No more exposure is necessary to cause it.
No more exposure. You're exposing yourself, and so it breaks out. It's like Lyme disease in that way. Probably another engineered horror. So. The point that I'm making is, if I want to protect myself, there are things that I will do. And one of them, the first in the line for me, and I'm putting my life on the line here, is to make sure that I am taking Nano Silver 10 parts per million. This particular Nano Silver, I spent 16 years looking for the best Nano Silver product on, or the best silver product on the planet. And I believe that I found it. It is remarkable. So silver, NaC as a supplement, because yes, you're supposed to get it in food, but you may not be getting enough to meet the needs of a potential disease situation. Vitamin C and vitamin D and iodine, liquid iodine. It is tremendously important.
Wasn't there an experiment with mice where they put a little bit under their nose and exposed them to viruses and they weren't affected? Did you hear about that one?
No, I did not. I did not. But if you have that reference and you send it to me, I would be very happy to have it.
Okay. Okay.
There are also experiments slightly to the side of this discussion in which people who are insulin-dependent diabetics were given an injection of insulin on their regular basis, but exposed to the smell of camphor for a period of time. And after a while, they merely had to be given the smell of camphor, and their body would produce the insulin that they were otherwise unable to produce.
Wow, so that brings up a lot of interesting questions for investigation.
So. And we've done experiments with diabetes and frequency and insulin and so on, whole different discussion. Oh dear, I'm going to have to come back. But in terms of the coronavirus, it is a serious threat to, the older you are. I happen to be 76, and I know that statistically, if I get the coronavirus, I'm supposed to be dead. Getting rid of old people is an interesting depopulation strategy. They tend to be expensive in a westernized medical system, and they are perceived of as useless. If you remember, we were told, I believe under the Obama administration, that the best thing we could do for the country would be to die.
Well, didn't Kissinger talk about that too, the useless?
Oh, Kissinger certainly did, but that was under Nixon. So, yeah. and since. So yeah. The point is that this is a very interesting virus in that it kills, the older you get, the higher the lethality becomes. We have yet to have a report of a child of 9 years or younger dying of the virus. That's very interesting. But we have reports that the older the person is, the more lethal it is. So that by the time you're 60 years old, the lethality is 14%. 14 out of every 100 people exposed and disease developing will die.
Now that's statistically in the general population, meaning people that are not doing any of the things you're talking about.
This is among the general population. I firmly believe that nobody has to die from this virus, whatever their age. And it's because of these precautions, and antiviral drugs are not the way to go. By the way, I have a strong and perhaps invalidating bias here as a physician practicing, it'll be 50 years in May since I graduated from medical school. I have never written a prescription for a pharmaceutical agent. So I have a strong bias against them. I am, of course, licensed to kill, but I choose not to.
You haven't experienced all the great benefits then?
No, I have not, nor do I have mugs and pens and clipboards in my office from agents that I consider to be toxic. I buy my own mugs and clipboards and pens and vacations. So I am an unwise and unusual physician, and I am trained as a psychiatrist. So that's a little even more unusual. But the point is, I do not believe that the antivirals are safe, and I know for sure that they're not effective. So now why would you take them? Oh, because your doctor told you to. Oh, right, of course. And your doctor who is trained by the pharmaceutical hegemony. You really want to trust him or her when it comes to what you should put in your body. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I'm not even sure. There's so much that we've gone over right now, and as I expected, it went by in 10 seconds. So if we want to talk about, you know, from this segment that we'll consider one segment of a series, I hope, because I'm going to be really nice and you'll have to come back. What from this segment that's been so short, how can we give people a summary to carry with them and remember for the actionable parts not to be forgotten? Okay,
we have to add something else in.
All right.
Shortly, despite the statement from the head of Health and Human Services, Czar, shortly we will find miraculously there's a vaccine that's going to save us all, and they'll be so happy because instead of taking the predicted year, it's only going to take 3 months, and now everybody should take the vaccine. Don't. Now that's a whole different segment, but I'm sure you've spoken to people about the fact that vaccines are ineffective, dangerous, damaging to the immune system, and spread diseases. The epidemiology is extremely clear. So how can people protect themselves? First of all, if the monsters are successful, and they don't just live in the closet and under the bed, these are the real monsters. If they are successful, there will be social disruption. The food supply will be damaged, possibly electricity, possibly water. You must have a water filter that can take contaminated water and filter. Brita is not your friend. You need a ceramic water filter.
Gravity feed.
Yes, gravity feed. You must have available food that you can be well nourished with for a period of time that you determine. For me, everything I eat is organic. And so I have made sure that I am provided with what I believe is sufficient, and it's all organic. And yes, it's more expensive, but A, I'm worth it, and B, cancer is really expensive. And so, well, death is cheap, but those are not my agenda items. So you must have a sense of personal security, however that is achieved for you. And you must, in my view, have Nano Silver, NAC, vitamin C, vitamin D, and iodine. I see these as the 5 essential immune supports. And if you don't have them, if you have 4 or 3 or 2, the only one that you absolutely cannot skip, as far as I'm concerned, based on the science, is the Nano Silver. Now, why would you skip any of them? You're too busy, you don't believe it, whatever. God bless you. It's your choice. But from my experience of 50 years of medicine and a lot of research and exploration, politically and medically and biochemically, of what's going on, these are my recommendations. And I think that they will assist those of us who are serious about surviving. Now, the possibility that I'm wrong is very, very hopeful. Dear God, let me be wrong.
Right, exactly. Okay, well, that's a lot to absorb. I recommend that everybody listen to this as often as they need to. The replays are going to be available free as long as it's still up. And if it's not, look at brighteon.com and the audio on opensourcetruth.com as well. And
we'll post it on our YouTube channel, Natural Solutions.
Okay, good.
And you can also please sign up for the newsletter at opensourcetruth.com or Dr. Rima Truth Reports, DRRIMA truthreports.com. This is life-saving.
Yeah, exactly. And I suggest that you download this so that if you can't find it, you still have it. And if you're friends with the president, give it to him. And if you know people in government at any level, give it to them. And let's just try to spread the information in spite of the
social media. Put the links on social media.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we should do a special installment just for the president, share it with everybody, but it'll be directed to him and the things that he is wrong about and what he needs to learn and do. And we should do it soon, if you're open to that. I'll be as nice as necessary.
Try.
I will. I'll try really hard. I'll read a book about it tonight. So thank you, Dr. Rima.
Thank you for having me, Richard. I truly appreciate it.
It's always super inspiring and educational, and I always feel frustrated that we don't have another 10 hours to talk. So we just have to do it in pieces.
Indeed. Thank you.
We'll see you again soon.